Oh, yes! Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back in to the tri-weekly Flyers podcast. Snow the Goalie, the only Flyers podcast, the People's podcast, the Players podcast, the Prognosticators podcast, the Pedialyte podcast, the podcast that some rando on Twitter called us bums for not recording for a few weeks. But that's how much this guy loves the show. He trolls, calls us bums, and here we are. We're back with a new episode. We're going to talk about Zach McEwen for 30 minutes on today's podcast. I don't mean that. The Flyers, a lot going on. And we have another team in town that we're going to touch on a little bit later. A very interesting thing that came up before we recorded the show. Make sure you stick around for that because that's also relevant to what's going on in Philadelphia as of late. But before we get into the show, let me introduce first a man who went up north of the border, conquered yet again, and walked away from yet another ice war. And that, of course, is Chris Terrian. Follow him on Twitter at CTerrian6. How are you doing, you delightful beaut, ya?
Great to see my two partners in crime. You know what, guys? What a week I just wrapped up. I finally got back into the area, but last Wednesday I had to do a keynote speech on to the CARE program for the University of St. Joe's University for their addiction program that they do an amazing job with. Then I left with the hockey jerseys, 45 of those jerseys going to Canada. Not going to tell anybody that I snuck them across the border, but maybe I did. So I drove up to Ottawa to catch a flight to Edmonton to avoid the Toronto airport because our other counterpart on Spit and Chicklets had warned everybody to beware at Ryan Whitney. So I said, all right, well, I'm going to stay out of the Toronto airport. I'm going to drive up, see my folks and family and friends for a few hours, fly to Edmonton, really get in the day before, do Ice Wars, which was a full 2-day event. Fly back to Edmonton, drive back from Ottawa to Philadelphia, and then I had to do a speech yesterday at a high school, Cocalico High School in Lancaster, and that wrapped up my whirlwind 5 or 6 day event, and I'm just thrilled to be here with you guys today to have some calm here for 30 minutes and enjoy ourselves. Good to see you guys.
That's good to hear. And of course, the other man, looking dapper down there, Mr. Anthony Sanfilippo. Find him on Twitter at AntSanPhilly. How are you? You're glowing. Is this because the Phillies are good? How are you?
Are you saying that I'm looking dapper because I shaved my head?
That has a little bit to do with it. I think you've embraced it, and it looks good. It's a good look on you.
Well, it's because when you're a balding individual, right? There's really I know I don't have the Bundy coif, right? I don't have that, right? But if you're a balding individual, there is nothing worse, right? And it's hysterical. Like I've been doing a lot of Phillies coverage lately. And in the press box there's a photo on the wall that's there from when they introduced, if you remember, they had the 5 aces. Yep. When it was Halladay and Lee and Hamels and Oswalt and Joe Blanton. And I actually was covering that press conference for the Daily Times, Delaware County at the time. And so that was 2011. And so that's 11 years ago. And there I am sitting in the front row in that photograph with a giant bald spot. Now, if 11 years ago I have a giant bald spot in a photograph, what the hell does it look like now when my hair grows in? So I thought I was like, you know what, the hell with it. Just take it all off. It'll look a hell of a lot better that way. And that's what I did. So that's why I got rid of it.
Anthony, you know.
But Russ, you forgot to also. Yeah.
Rick Tocchet.
Go ahead, Bundy.
Rick Tocchet did that, Anthony. Remember he had that gorgeous flow there, everybody in the 80s? And finally started to tap out in the 90s, and he had no choice but to shave that thing. But Brian Bellows, I remember like in warm-up one day, Brian Bellows had like a rug on or something. He was really particular about his hair. And I think he finally got like one of those new age formulas. And I remember he was standing in warm-up one day. And I've never seen a guy get fucking buried like this in my life. Like he was standing there and they're like, you know, like, what do you got a dead hat on your head? Like everything, right? Like he had this, I don't know, it was a rug. He had a toupee. And like he was proud of this puppy.
And it came flying off. Did it come flying off?
No, it didn't flop, but I mean it was like perfect, man. I remember looking at it, I was like, holy Jesus, look at that thing. And then you can't wear it.
Kind of Kerry Fraser-ish?
Kerry's was real. This thing was like flat out. Someone carved it off the back carpet. You walk into your house and slap it on the top of his head. I mean, it was just hilarious. And then he went into like the other guys have gone in. There's NHL guys that all with their hair, phallic, like Hexy, Ronnie Hextall couldn't stand the fact he's got that little. He had like the monk when he was like 30.
Yeah.
And you know, instead of going with that's what happened with Talk, he just shaved it right off. You know, sometimes it's better. It's a better option, and it looks good on you. I mean, what do you want? Do you want to walk around with a rug on your head and everybody talk about you?
Well, I'll tell you
Especially
what. As somebody who hasn't had to have the follically challenged moments that maybe Anthony has had to have, I will say I've gone back and looked at pictures because I've got a 5 head. I've always had a 5 head. And, like, I occasionally will get a little bit self-conscious, and I'll go back and look at pictures from 5 or 10 years ago. And I'm, like, kind of, like, trying to figure out, has it receded at all? It hasn't. So it's always been like this. So I feel okay. Good hair runs in my family. So hopefully I won't have to sit here in about 50 years when I'm Anthony's age and, decide if I'm going to shave my head or not. So
it looks good, Anthony.
And you know what? One other thing you forgot, Russ.
What's that?
Thanks, Bundy. One other thing you forgot to mention, Russ, was the whole thing that we did on Twitter when I was out in Pittsburgh, where I'm standing in line.
It's been weeks. Remember, this rando on
only
Twitter
a week and
who's
a
been
half ago.
trolling us for a while about not putting a podcast out
a week and a half
has
ago.
just has captured my attention. You're right. So Anthony goes out to PNC Park. He's watching that dead sport called baseball. I just triggered like 10 people listening to the show. And Anthony texts, and he's just like, well, he's like, you wouldn't believe what just happened. A guy just came up to me, and he said, hey, I love Snow the Goalie. I'm like, no, you didn't. I figured this is like one of those times that Anthony embellishes. And I'm like, tweet it. Because I don't think that Anthony has the balls to go out and put like a fake story out on Twitter. Like he holds his Twitter as like some kind of, sanctimonious place. You cannot tell a lie there. And so he does. He tweets about it. And then the guy responds. Now, can I guarantee that this isn't like an Anthony Sanfilippo burner that he occasionally, engages with? I don't know. Would I put it beyond Anthony to have like a network of burner accounts to interact with? No, I wouldn't. But I'm pretty sure this guy is real. So, Anthony, why don't you tell the story about what happened? You're out to see a baseball game with your sons.
Yeah. I took my dad. I took my dad and my sons out to Pittsburgh for like a weekend, baseball weekend. We had been planning to do it for several years, and the pandemic got in the way, and they had never been to PNC Park. And Bundy, I know you've been there. It's literally top 2 or 3 baseball stadiums in America. I mean, really, it's that awesome. And so I really wanted them to experience it. And my son Andrew collects something from each team whenever he goes to a different stadium. So he wanted to go get something Pittsburghy for the Pirates. So we're standing in line in the team store, and a guy just comes walking over and says, "Anthony Sanfilippo?" And I'm like, "Oh shit! Like who knows me here now?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Man, just want to let you know, love Snow the Goalie. I love the podcast, man. It's the best podcast out there." I'm like, "Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate it." He's like, "No, I just want to come over and tell you, really, really love your work. Really love Crossing Broad." And I'm like, "Hey, thanks a lot." And we do this whole little exchange. And as he's walking away, the girl that he's with, the woman that he's with, whether I don't know if they're married, if girlfriend, whatever, but the woman looks back and looks over at me and she goes, "I don't listen to you at all, but it's nice to meet you as well." And I said, "Well, thanks." And she goes, "But all I know is you get him fired up every time you have a new episode come out. So just wanted to let you know that." I'm like, "Well, thanks. I appreciate it." So I was totally not expecting this whole thing to happen. And there we were in the middle of PNC Park on a Friday night and just had this happen in the team store out in Pittsburgh. So yeah, Snow the Goalie's a little bit of everywhere.
And
we're a little everywhere.
And it's kind of funny, too, because I was happy when you sent that, and I think it's fun that people would like to come up to you in person and address you. I have to be honest, though. If the first reaction had been Anthony Sanfilippo, I would have just expected that it was like somebody from Delco. That there's just like, I know Delco, as I've said multiple times before, Delco is the Schuylkill County of Southeast PA. They're everywhere. Nothing would shock me. Like if that had just been somebody who like went to, what is it, St. Joe's Prep? That's the one that you like. Like if they had gone there, or it's like somebody who was, dragging a cigarette outside of a Wawa and you like gave them a light, 13 years ago, like wouldn't have surprised me. It is nice to know though that Snow the Goalie fans are everywhere. I told you guys a few weeks back, maybe a month ago, people were delivering an appliance to my in-laws. Guy's wearing a Flyers hat. Mother-in-law says, "Oh, Flyers fan." He goes, "Yeah." She goes, "You listen to any podcast?" And he goes, "Yeah, Snow the Goalie." And she's like, "Oh my God." So I don't know. I mean, listen, when you do a show and you get numbers back on downloads and unique listeners and all that, and you see the numbers go kaboom, and they continue to grow, you go, all right, I mean, how much of that's real? I know for a fact there are a few different platforms that are notorious for inflating numbers. We're not on one of those, which is kind of nice. But when you actually start to see it, when you start to run into people and you start finding out that there are more and more people listening, especially while the team hasn't been good, it's a nice little feeling. Bundy, how often do you get approached in public? I have to imagine that it's all the time. Do people feel comfortable coming up to a big menacing human being such as yourself very often?
You know what? Yeah. I mean, I think one thing I've done, or at least the way maybe I'm approachable, but I feel like people can come up to me and say hello, and I think that's great. To be able to do that. It always makes me more uncomfortable when somebody brings their kid up. He's like, hey, I'd like you to take a picture. He's really nervous because I don't want anyone to feel like that. First of all, I mean, there's superstar athletes, and then there's just former athletes, right, that are normal people and stuff. Like Michael Jordan can't go out in public. Tiger Woods probably can't. Chris Tarian can go anywhere he wants. There's nobody holding me back where I'm going to get bothered in public. But certainly I think in Philadelphia regionally, I get approached from, certainly that group of fans that enjoyed that legacy of hockey and the history of the team. So it's really cool. And I always tell people, if you see me somewhere, come say hi again. That's the way it should be anyway. So, we're all sportsmen here. And I think Philadelphia for that is really great like that. I think the fans, no matter what here, they appreciate their sports teams and they respect the players that played here in Philadelphia. And I think that's a really cool thing. I do.
So, guys, there's not a ton to talk about here on the Flyers this week. There's not some kind of master plan underway. Chuck Fletcher's not waiting until the last minute to make some kind of a trade splash. Development camp, began. World Juniors are going on. From your perspective, and I want to try to stay a little bit upbeat today. I don't want to drone on about how awful Chuck Fletcher is at his job. That goes without saying. Where are you at right now? Not in terms of excitement, because I think it's still a little bit early to be excited about the start of a hockey season. But is there something that when you sit back and you look at the moves that have been done in the conference and even within the division, and you realize that this team, just fundamentally, probably a bottom 3 team in the Metro, bottom 5, bottom 6 maybe in the East. Is there something about the team that has you excited? Is there a player who might be coming back from injury? Or is there a prospect that, you've been hearing things about within the organization that you say, you know what, I'm excited to see this kid play and to see him maybe take the next step? Does that happen right now? Ant, do you have the warm and fuzzies for anything going around the team right now?
No, what I am intrigued by is how do they respond to Tortorella? That's what I'm intrigued by. I want to see does his coaching style fit and play here, and do these guys buy into it? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they don't have a choice. They have to, otherwise they're not going to have jobs, right? It's almost like if with the exception of a few of their better players, I mean, guys who are kind of towards the back end of the lineup or fringe guys, you're not in the back end of a lineup or a fringe guy on a bad team just because. This is it's almost like it's time to shit or get off the pot, man. Really, I mean that's what this becomes. And I'm going to be curious to see how they buy into what John is selling. And so that to me is the thing that I'm most interested in seeing, because I do, and I think Bundy said this before, I do think that if they do buy into it, they could actually get off to a decent start and be a little bit of a surprise early in the season. But I don't see how that sustains over the course of the year, over the full course of the season. But I do think that there is a possibility that they get off to a quick start with Tortorella as a coach. That being said, I think it's just as much a possibility that they absolutely come out and are a total shit show again. I don't know if there's a middle ground. You know what I'm saying? I think they could be really, really good and surprise people again for a month or two, or they could just be a disaster. And I think that that's kind of what we're waiting and seeing.
Two things come to me right now, Anthony, just following up on that. How many players will hold this together this year, right? That's the question. If a couple injuries come and they're the key guys, do all the wheels come off right away? That'll be an interesting part to see how healthy they can stay, because there are some veterans that might be able to glue this together a little bit in patchwork, and that'll be a challenge. The other thing I think with Torts, and listen, the biggest acquisition they made is John Tortorella. I don't care what anybody says. He's bigger than any player they got. He's bigger than anybody that's come in. What he's got to be careful of, from where I'm watching things, is that he doesn't go on a season-long turd flushing mission. Like where he's trying to flush out every single turd that he thinks is on this team and tries to fix it overnight. That's going to be a really, really wrong way of going. I think he has to know he's coming in with a little bit of a porta potty already, and it's not necessarily for him to go out and fix that. That's the general manager's job to do that. Torts was brought in to coach a team, but he takes things personally, right, over the course of time. And if he comes in and he realizes, man, I put my system in place and it's not working because I don't have enough good players, he's got to be very, very careful of how he handles that. And that's been a situation before where he's not afraid to go after or tell anybody anything. And I think he can be effective if he's careful with that, because if he comes in here and he sees what he's got, I don't even know if he knows what he's got yet. Honestly, God, you may watch tapes, but unless you've seen this up close and personal, I'm not really sure he's even going to have an understanding of what he's dealing with until he gets into it. I do think on fear alone, and from where the guys, from the standpoint of the players, and I alluded this to having that Hitchcock before, he comes in as just this big asshole, wants to shake up the trees everywhere, and sometimes trees don't need shaking. They just need to be redirected, right? Like the lineup needs to be redirected, not blowing up. But, that's a Hitchcock guy, right? It's all about him. He won the Stanley Cup. Dallas Stars were lucky to have him. And that's just the kind of – so you got to be careful with that and the way it goes. But early in the season, I think they will have it will reverberate through the lineup, because I think guys are just going to be able to just play on sheer trying to make an impression on Torts, to leave an impression on whoever's watching, and to try to not get in his doghouse for the entire year. There's no way it's going to be able to sustain itself, because they just don't have the horses to do it.
And I want to go through this really quick. Guys that we don't expect, as you shovel food into your mouth, how many times do we have to get a comment on a YouTube video saying the show would be fine if Ant weren't shoveling food in his mouth? Now listen, when we're recording and you're doing family dinner
watermelon.
with seven,
it's watermelon.
Are you eating with a fork? What?
Well, it's already cut, and I don't want to get my fingers all
Are you the kind of person that buys the pre-cut watermelon? Like, you won't buy the watermelon and slice it yourself? Is that what this is?
Yes, and
do we have
no.
to have an intervention here?
I do it both ways.
Okay.
But in this case, it was pre-sliced.
Talking about pre-sliced watermelon right now?
Yeah, we are. I mean, listen, Bundy, what do you want to talk about? You want to talk about how Nazem Kadri's probably going to go to the Islanders? Do you want to talk about that? No, let me unpack this for a second. So if we look at the team, and I'm going to try to be overly optimistic here, because if I have to start, a season being down in the doldrums and tanking for Bedard or whatever, I might jump out the window. Now, granted, getting Bedard would be great, but I cannot physically and mentally go through, the next 8 months or whatever saying this team sucks and Chuck Fletcher's going to try to, poke and prod and maybe they'll be a fringe playoff team. I don't want that. Let me run through this really quick. Guys that we know will not be available to start the year. Joel Farabee. We think he'll be out through maybe Thanksgiving or so. Ryan Ellis might not play this year. Kevin Hayes is coming off of what, 3?
Although I will say this about Ryan Ellis. Just
do we have an update?
I won't call it an update per se, but I do know privately from some conversations that he has told the team that he does intend to play at some point.
He does intend. Okay.
He does intend to play at some point this year.
So
when that is, I don't know, but he does intend to.
So we got Farabee is out, Ellis is out to start the year. Kevin Hayes had 3 core muscle surgeries within a 15-month window. We think he'll be back. for the start of the season. Sean Couturier is coming off of a legitimate injury, will likely be ready at some point early. Is there anybody else of note on the, say the star front that isn't going to be ready for camp? I think other than that, the team is like relatively healthy. We're not talking about the prospects, like Bobby Brink's now out. We've got kind of covered that in the past. If the idea here is, okay, two of your better players, arguably your number one defenseman, and one of your best young forwards is out, it does create the possibility of a bunch of younger guys stepping in and trying to fill roles and perhaps trying to catch the eye of their new head coach. Can I interest you guys in the idea that might end up being better if you're looking for wins early in the season? That a bunch of low-ego young players trying to impress the coach that's going to be here for the next 3 years, if they buy in and they play the system and they play a team style, and you don't have guys that you could typically fall back on, you don't have a Claude Giroux to produce the points, you don't necessarily have like a number one wing that can, pop 30 goals. Is there a scenario here where going into a season like this, the team ends up being better because they have to play for one another rather than relying on a couple of big point producers?
I think it's a lower scoring game for the Flyers, and when it's a lower scoring game, they have a chance to win. That's kind of how what Tortorella did with Columbus, right, Bundy? I mean, it was a team that they didn't have a lot of firepower on offense. I mean, yeah, he did have a Panarin, and he did have Atkinson at his best when he was there. They had a couple players, but for the most part, it was all about playing a defense-first style, being an opportunistic offensive team, and relying on defense and goaltending to win. So I think you're going to see a lot more lower scoring games, and if the Flyers can keep the score low, and keep it being where they're a decent puck possession team. I mean, nobody expects them to be top of the charts, but at least slightly better than 50%. Then I think there's a real possibility, Russ, that you're right that they could have that younger player buy in and do well early in the year. But like Bundy said earlier, that can only carry you so far. You can only, heart and soul can only get you so far. Eventually, talent that's playing hard is going to win out, right? If the other team's matching your effort and they're a more talented team, they're going to win. The only way it doesn't is if they don't match your effort. You can try and out-effort teams all you want, and it might work sometimes, but it's not going to work over the course of an 82-game season where you're constantly out-efforting the other team and have that be a victory.
So right. Bundy, what do you say the shelf life is? Let's just say conceptually, no other major injuries. Farabee and Ellis are out. Bunch of young guys are trying to step up, buying totally into Tortorella's system, going balls to the walls, giving everything they've got. How long can that realistically last?
20 games. And that'll be a fast 20 games. Okay. That's about a month and a half, a month and a little less than 2 months. And you're gonna get yourself to Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
Like even in Columbus that year that they came in with Torts. And again, like this is kind of something. But I look at that roster now, Anthony. They had some better players than the Flyers did. Like even when he was in there, like they had Dubois before he got traded to Winnipeg. They had Werenski.
True.
I'm just thinking of other guys. They had some.
But he was But Werenski was a project for him.
They had big guys like Boone Jenner. Like I know he came in, he played well for. Atkinson was there, played well, got a lot out of him, and they ended up where if I'm not mistaken, with that talent and lack thereof, I think they were an 8 seed one year, playing number 1 Tampa, and swept them right in what ended up being Tampa's kind of life lesson to their organization. Like, hey, you got to lose real bad before you go on and win. I just don't think he has the horses, but realistically, if you can keep guys that long, 20 games, make things interesting by Thanksgiving. The problem is we haven't factored in injuries. We don't know what's gonna happen here. The team is not deep.
Yep.
And again, there's going to be some guys after a certain amount of time, they're going to hate him, whether you want to believe it or not. Just go read Twitter from other guys that played for him, right? He's not like a guy there's some guys be like, yeah, I really like Torts. And then there's other guys like, oh my God, forget about it. Like, he's a nightmare to play for. He gets up in your grill. He doesn't stop the whole year. He wears you down. So yeah, there will be guys like that where they're going to come in the morning like, oh fuck, you know what? I got to listen to this guy again, and here we go again. And then that negativity I'm telling you, I've seen it happen. It happens to almost every player at some point with a coach. So how long that lasts? Like Anthony said, they're going to be playing. Almost everybody they play has more talent than they do. How hard they play will keep them in games, but ultimately when talent realizes you can't take them for granted because Torts is going to have to make sure they're working really hard, that's when the wheels will fall off, because I think at the beginning they actually will outwork teams to start.
So then let me make this pitch. If you're going to have to rely on younger guys, right? And like a big part of this, anytime you build a successful team in this league, there has to be top-end talent. We know that. That top-end talent's going to take up a large chunk of your cap. And then you've got to fill in the cracks with either young up-and-coming players or guys who fit their role, guys who don't cost a lot. So, all right, let's say conceptually, you've got to go into the season. And, like, let's say Tortorella's mindset is, I have to identify 7 guys on this team, 7 of the younger players that are going to be ride-or-die guys for the next 3 years. These are going to be the guys that we're going to develop. These are the guys that we're going to continue to work with, to lean on more in all situations. And, like, these are the guys. Isn't it better if you're a team, you get to go into this with no expectations, and you're Tortorella, you get to weed out the guys who, to your point, say, damn, this guy sucks to play for. He's always up in your grill. Like, from my vantage point, I think, well, good, I don't want those guys. You shouldn't want those guys. You shouldn't want your young players to feel entitled and feel like they need to be babied. Like, you should want guys who want to prove their worth at this level. So, like, in a way, could it be a good thing that there are no expectations for this team, and that, like, you might actually figure out, hey, there are 7 good guys on this team. There are 7 good young players with their heads on straight that we can kind of build around. And, like, in the next 2 or 3 years, you make trades, you make free agent signings, and you say, you know what, we've got a solid backbone of guys we've developed and guys that we've decided to roll with. Like, if that's the only thing you get out of this season, is that a bad thing?
The problem is, for me, and I think Anthony's going to agree with me, we don't have a Nolan Patrick that was supposed to shine right at the top of the draft. That's where those guys, those young guys, like that you're talking about, like something we could build around, you find those guys at the high end of the draft, and the Flyers just don't have one. You know, I mean, you could say Bobby Brink or, oh, we got, Bobby Brink. Yeah, he's a nice college player. I don't know I hope he has a great career and proves, everybody right that he's going to be, decent NHLer. But again, that's not a guy that's going to Connor McDavid or Austin Matthews or even Mitch Marner you into a playoff spot where everybody else can revolve around that young piece of talent. So I don't. Yeah, I mean, can you find guys like maybe Morgan Frost is a guy, right, Anthony? That's somebody that continues developing. Maybe he shines like he did in junior, but that's going to take some time to find. I just don't think there's 7 of them here. That's a lot. We know about it already.
Well, just to clarify, I don't mean 7 guys that are going to be like your top, anywhere near your top. I'm saying like 7 guys that I say, you know what, this guy could be a middle sixer. This guy can be a second pair defenseman, maybe. Like those kind of guys. I don't think that they have anybody right now in the pipeline who can be that top line, legit scoring winger. I don't think they have a guy who's going to, push Ivan Provorov on the top pair. I just mean like more of those fill in the cracks kind of guys. The hope is if they're really bad, they will get a couple of top picks that will have that top end talent and you build around those.
They're hoping Carter Gauthier turns into that. I mean, you draft the kid 5th overall, right? And you're moving him to a new position that you think that will exploit his talents. They'll shine through. And so I mean, they're hoping that you have that. And there's still a lot of young players to be seen. The one thing that I never criticize Chuck and Brent Flair about is I actually think that they draft better than most people give them credit for. So I think that there's some players that are going to be coming here in the next couple of years. I just don't think that they're going to be here to see it happen, right? I just don't think that they. And so to answer your question, Russ, yes, let's say you find those 7 guys, and is that a bad thing that we wrap up the year with that being the case? No, that's not a bad thing. What would be a bad thing would be, okay, let those guys, let who's in charge now continue to build the team from there. I think you have to let somebody else come in and do it at this point.
You mean in the front office, just to be clear? Yeah. I just wanted to be clear because there was a lot of theys there. So okay.
Well, it's because it is a they. That's the thing. That's the problem with the Flyers. It's not a one-man operation. It's to me, there's too many fingers in the pot. We went from having it be Ron Hextall alone, not listening to anybody, doing everything by himself, which was not a good thing, to a situation where Chuck Fletcher needs 12 people to sign off on every decision that he makes. You know, there needs to be a middle ground.
Well,
there needs to be a middle ground.
I don't remember if I said this on the show.
Flyers make decisions now. You know, you guys used to ask, like, hey, I need 2 tickets to the game tonight. They're decision makers over there now. Hey, guys, I need a pair of tickets to the Canadians game tonight on the road. Hold on a minute. I'm just making some hockey decisions. I'll get to you in a minute.
Jesus. I don't remember if I said this on the show or not, but around the time that the DeBrincat sweepstakes were happening, I talked to somebody from another organization just about conceptually, like, have the Flyers done due diligence? Have they talked? Like, what does it feel like in terms of negotiating? And this person from another team said there are too many cooks in the kitchen. You don't actually know who you're communicating with. Like, you don't know who's actually going to be the one. Fletcher pulls the trigger on it, but, like, is he really the one who's made the determination on value, whether it's draft picks? Anthony, you talked about this, I think, on the last episode. You know, that idea of, throwing Ian Anderson out there as the guy who was the one who, came up with the evaluation of, just how valuable a pick is. And I think that ultimately, you have to find a healthy in-between. I think it's hard to... Like, let's say if you're going to shit on Hextall because he was a unilateral decision maker, and then you step back and you say, you know what, he needed to rely on more people. He needed to talk to more people. But then you have Chuck Fletcher, and then you kind of shit on the idea that he collaborates with other people. There has to be a healthy in-between. There has to be. And one has to think that, like, in a collaborative environment, but also one that's run by somebody who can ultimately build a team to win a cup, you have to be in the middle of that. Bundy, I want to take a look at this with you. You were talking about Thanksgiving as being maybe the cutoff or the first 20 games. I want to go through this with you. We're going to do a little thought exercise here on the show. Obviously, as you mentioned, you don't know what injuries are going to happen. You don't have no idea what's going to happen between now and the start of the season. Is it possible the Flyers make a trade? Conceptually, sure. Based on what we know they have, based on what the team looks like it will be, here are the first 20 games. I want you to do a little mental tally. Now, if you want to tell me, I can write this down. I can keep track of points over here. We could do that. I have a colored pencil and everything. I'm ready to go. So you start the season at home against the Devils. Let's do the thought experiment. Win, lose, OT, loss. A win. Okay, we're going to go with a win. Outright win, okay. At home against the Canucks.
That's an outright loss. So you don't win 2 in a row.
That's a loss, okay. On the road against the Lightning.
1 and 2. Regulation lost.
Okay. On the road against the Panthers. 3. Oh, boy. On the road against the Predators.
1 and 4. Actually, let's go 1-3-1. They're going to lose that one in overtime.
There we go. 1-3-1 through the first 5. There's hope. So you're saying there's a chance. At home against the Sharks.
I'm going to go with an outright win.
Outright win. Ooh, look at you. Okay. Hosting the Panthers.
That's a loss again. Outright regulation loss.
Okay. Hosting the Hurricanes.
That's a loss in regulation.
Okay. On the road against the
That's
Rangers.
A loss in overtime.
Okay. On the road against Toronto.
That's a win in overtime. Yeah.
A win?
A win against Toronto.
Ooh.
You're going to keep these, right, Russ?
Okay. I am. I have it right here. On the road against Claude Giroux's Ottawa Senators.
That's a loss in regulation. Ottawa wins that game.
Okay. At home against the
That's
Blues.
a loss. Regulation.
Okay. On the road against the Blue Jackets.
That's a win in overtime. That's a win. I'm going to give them a win.
That's a win. Okay. Okay. On or at home against. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm sorry. At home against the Senators.
That's a loss.
Giroux's going to have a hat trick in that game, right, Bundy?
It's a straight up loss. Okay.
Yeah, well, you know what? What I'm actually saying,
Hush.
See,
Hush
even though
you.
you're reading them to me, I've got a quick fix in my head. That's Giroux's first game back. Ottawa's going to have their hair on fire for him. So, next game.
Yep.
Hold on, Ed. Bear with us. We're almost.
Okay. Home against Dallas.
That's a coin toss. So I'm going to give them a win because it's at home. I don't think Dallas is on the decline too.
Okay. At Columbus.
I'm gonna go loss this time. I already had them with one win against Columbus. This is a loss.
Okay. At
That's a
Boston.
loss.
Okay.
a
At
win.
Montreal. Home against
That's a
Calgary.
loss.
Okay. And on the road against Washington.
It's another coin toss. Let's give them the win. Let's give them the win in overtime.
Okay. So let me double check. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. All right, so through the first 20 games, you've given the Flyers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wins. You have given them 1, 2,
11.
2 overtime
11.
losses. And let me do the math here. That's 11 regulation losses. So 11,
That's
7,
fine.
11, and 2. And that's actually not that bad. All things considered, that's not that bad. And
Okay.
I'm going to run you through the same exercise. I just want to see where your head's at. We're going to do the first 20
Just
games.
kind of spit it out. Give yourself
So we've got
2 seconds.
just
Win.
react. Just react. Home against the Devils.
Loss.
Home against the Canucks.
Loss.
At
Loss.
Tampa. At Florida.
Overtime loss.
At Nashville.
This is unreal.
Don't say anything, Bundy. Don't say anything. You
Win.
shut up. Home against San Jose.
Loss.
Home against Florida.
Loss.
Home against Carolina. On the road
Shootout
against the
loss.
Rangers.
Was he listening?
On the
Loss.
road against Toronto. Hold on. On the road against Toronto.
Win.
On the road, Ottawa.
Loss.
Home against St. Louis.
I think they play for Torts.
On the
there.
road,
Torts come back
Columbus.
to Columbus. They give them a win. I that's the Giroux game. I'll Ottawa. wins
Home
that
against Ottawa.
one. Win.
Home against Dallas.
I think they'll lose this one.
On the
They'll make it
road,
an
Columbus.
overtime or a shootout. One of those. Loss.
Okay. At
Win.
Boston. At Montreal.
I'm actually going to give them a win
Home against
there. I
Calgary.
think Calgary's an interesting team this year. Yeah, I'll give the Flyers a
Okay. And
loss.
then on the road against Washington. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wins.
7,
3
10, and 3.
overtime losses. Oh my gosh, 7, 10, and 3. Bundy was 7, 11, and 2. Now here's the beauty of this. So the people who watch on the Crossing Broad YouTube channel, they're going to notice that there have been like a couple of times where like Bundy's dropped out, Ant dropped out and switched over to his phone.
back it up.
So we've got like full on Sanfilippo here. Ant dropped out while Bundy was doing his predictions. Now, I didn't do a side-by-side. What I'm going to request somebody, preferably somebody who follows on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram, the most rabid people are the ones who are in the Twitter community. Remember, we have the Snow the Goalie Twitter community. You can request to be added into that. That's a great group of people. I'm sure somebody who's in that community will do the side-by-side of Ant's picks and Bundy's picks. I'm pretty sure that through the first 9 games, you guys had the exact same results. You differed on Toronto. I think that was the first one where there was a variation.
He gave them an Ottawa win, except we flipped the Columbus. He had the same idea because he took the home and home and just gave them 1 win each way. It didn't matter. So, but I understood what he was doing there. Yeah. We're similar. We're almost the same thing.
So here's the interesting thing. I'm not going to do this exercise. Here's the thing that's interesting about it. You know, we're sitting here talking about how this team is fundamentally flawed. Should be a bottom. You know, if we're being honest, bottom 3 team in the Met, bottom 6 team in the conference, maybe worse. Maybe they play for torts. It's honestly kind of astounding here that when you look at this, I mean, sure, if you do what I think all 3 of us like to do, which is an overtime loss is a loss. So this is under 500. This is either a 7-13 team. Either way, it's a 7-13 team. One of you had an extra overtime loss, but like realistically, 6 games under 500, points aside. That's not that bad. Like for how bad this team is on paper and how bad this team stacks up against, the elite teams or even like the contending teams in the conference, that honestly isn't as bad as I expected it to be from you two. The problem, and this is where we come back to the thing from the start, and I don't want to belabor this point. The thing that we said in the beginning, a team can play for a coach and can play balls to the walls. If you want to say it's 20 games, that's 20 games. The problem is what happens the week of Thanksgiving and beyond. If the wheels fall off at that point, if you start to regress, if you start kind of coming back to what your actual talent level is, then it's going to get a lot uglier. The one thing that can flip this is that Joel Farabee might be back around the time that we finished, doing the predictions here. And if Ant's, most updated thing on Ellis is correct, there's a chance that at some point Ellis comes back. We don't know if that'll be Thanksgiving, Christmas. Will he come back at all? We don't know. Conceptually, though, if you're 7-10-3 or 7-11-2, that does not take you out of the running for a top pick in the draft. And at the same time, I don't think you can go into that if you're ownership and say, well, there are signs of life here with this team. If that pace were to hold through the rest of the year, you're in pretty decent shape in terms of if you wanted to make a change in the front office. If the wheels were to fall off around Thanksgiving, one would probably assume that that would force a change. All right, I appreciate you guys doing the thought exercise. I want to talk about one other thing. We alluded to this at the top of the show. There's one team right now in town that has a lot of excitement. Not the Eagles yet. There's obviously excitement about Eagles season starting. But the Phillies have done something since firing Joe Girardi, and that's win. And players on the team who had played pretty bad ball for a good chunk of the season have stepped it up since Bryce Harper went out. And it got me thinking, and we talked about this before the show, got me thinking about a Flyers team in the past that Bundy played on that played really well without Eric Lindros, and then he returned to the lineup, and it kind of fell apart. So Bryce Harper is the reigning NL MVP. He arguably was on pace to be an MVP candidate again this season. If you are running the show with the Phillies, do you consider keeping Bryce Harper out? I know it's crazy. This isn't my take, by the way. I'm not going to say whose take this was. I think you have to throw Harper back in. Baseball is a more individualistic sport. He's going to DH. He's not going to mess up your chemistry on the field, whatever. But if it's you, and I'll start with Bundy. If it's you, you see how like Real Muto has played. You've seen how Hoskins has stepped up. Do you consider not bringing Harper back into the fold as soon as he's ready?
If you have something, I can't speak for the regular season because I just think when you lose a guy like that over time, especially 162 games, I don't want to go too long in this, but I think that, I think a guy like that's impact you can miss over a long period of time. But I will tell you one thing. If you're on a playoff run and you've got something going, you went into that run, leave the guy wherever the hell he is. I don't care what talent he is. I mean, in 2000, there's not many guys that are vocal. I really believe we were going to win the Stanley Cup. We had a 3-1 lead in the Devils. We just had to get through that series. I think most of us felt optimistic. When the rumblings of Eric were that he was decided he wanted to come back and try to be a member of the team, the wheels came off our best players. Yeah, he's the most talented guy of the bunch, but there was something about that group that we were pushing through in spite of Eric, in spite of him not being there. I don't know the personality. Bryce Harper, by all intents, seems like a well-liked guy on his baseball team. That may not have always been the case with other guys, but I will say this. They may or may not be a better team without him. I don't know long-term because he's going to be here a long time. But the year he left the Washington Nationals, they somehow won the World Series. And I know had Juan Soto came in and guys really stepped up. Strasburg was incredible, right, Anthony? Like finally he had become that number 1 pick overall and that dynamic. And then Scherzer was incredible too. So I don't want to say it, but sometimes you can rely on a star player so much and you don't even realize in your own head you're doing it, where it takes that one little bit of edge off of what your game was that was making your team successful without that star player. So I don't know, but I'll tell you one thing. The Phillies are playing like this at the end of September. I'll tell you one thing. I would have the balls as a manager to say, you know what? I know we got the DH, which is different now in the National League, so that helps, as you said. But I would have no problem rolling with the team that I felt was the winning formula and leave the superstar on the bench. If they'd have left the superstar in the press box in 2000, we would have had a Stanley Cup here. I believe that because everybody was marching in the same direction, whether it was in spite of Eric, whether it's because guys didn't want him around, or whether we wanted to prove that we were better, we were just as good without him. We clearly were right there, and when he came back, for whatever reason, the wheels came off, and that's the harsh reality.
No, I did not fall
Anthony fell asleep. Somebody slapped him.
Just listen.
Good.
That's the last story I
Ant with his long COVID. Ant,
I listened
what
to
do
the
you?
whole thing. I can repeat everything Bundy just said.
So Ant, you and
I know.
good old Big Bet Bob. No. So Ant, Big Bet Bob and you do Crossed Up, and you guys have been pretty vocal. You've been down in the clubhouse. You've been talking to players, other writers. You are also featured in that great video of Jim Salisbury and Nick Castellanos going at it. Where do you stand? So Bundy says leave Harper on the bench. Where do you stand?
With Bundy on this if we were already in the playoffs and this was happening. And the debate was, do we bring him back? And where do we put him in the lineup? And how does it fit? I think the Phillies are at a point where there's nothing guaranteed yet about the playoffs, no matter how well they're playing. And while bringing a player like Harper back in could be just as equally upsetting the apple cart as it could be benefiting the lineup, I think you still have to in the regular season. You just have to. And the argument that I made was that San Diego Padres, they went out and made all the big trades. They got Juan Soto and Josh Bell and Brandon Drury and Josh Hader, and they were the champions of the deadline, and then proceeded to come out of the deadline losing 5 of 6, went 26 consecutive innings without scoring a run. The offense was terrible. They were hitting below 200 as a group, and it makes you look at it and say, yeah, you added these great players, but how long does it take for that chemistry to kind of come together? And will it come together in time this season? Russ, you're a big basketball fan, right? Big basketball guy. And I know Harden was not the player that
big basketball
that everybody
guy.
kind of was hoping he was going to be. But there was a real, how are we going to meld this together? How is this going to work with this group? Period for the Sixers that never really materialized itself, and it was part of the reason why they were knocked out of the playoffs. So these things happen when you bring in star quality, and it's not a knock on Bryce Harper by any stretch of the imagination. The guy's the MVP. Everybody wants him to be part of this, right? I mean, there's nobody sitting there saying we don't want to bring Bryce Harper back. Oh no. So it's a real conundrum. But I think that with the Phillies still pursuing a playoff spot and it only being August, I think you have to bring him back. But if it were October and they were already in the playoffs and having some success, and maybe you're getting into the NLCS. It's like, should we bring Harper back now? Then I'm more on Bundy's side. I'm like, I don't touch what's working. What's working. I don't keep it going, keep it as is. Yeah, obviously there's also a different dynamic. Would Harper's teammates embrace him coming back? I think they would in that instance. The one thing I can say about that clubhouse is it's very, very tight knit. They all really like each other a lot. There's not a lot of ego in there. And I'm pretty sure that the 2000 Flyers were like that, minus
kind of like the 2000 Flyers without Eric. I'm not hearing you, Anthony.
Yeah, Anthony cut out there. I don't know what happened to his audio. Well, it might show up in the actual recording itself. We'll see. There he goes. This is why we're going to probably switch platforms for next week. I want to go. So our last thing this week, and if Ant comes back in and finishes his point, cool, and if not, this will be fine too. Last thing for this week, we got 2 new 5-star reviews. They warm Bundy's heart. They make Anthony smile. I'm happy to read them. We've got 2. First one is from Ray Toll, which came about 2 weeks ago. Thanks for not being like that other Flyers podcast. 5 stars. Good day, fellow hockey people. I've been listening to this pod for about a year now, and I really enjoy the insight, banter, etc. about the worst-run hockey team in the world, not just the NHL. I do also listen to that other podcast that talks about the Flyers, the high and mighty preachy one. And I do enjoy some aspects of that show too. But sometimes when certain people on that show open their mouths, my ears begin to bleed and I cringe like Michael Scott in that one Office meme. It's not just the screechy voice, it's also the word salads that are sometimes constructed and endowed upon the world. So thank you for not being like that. Ant, Russ, and Bundy are a good trio with inside knowledge of what happens behind the scenes in the Flyers circus tent. Front office. Anyway, if you are a hockey fan, I recommend listening. You won't regret it. So a big thank you to Ray Toll. And then let's go to the last one here. LCD24, 5 stars, great podcast. It is refreshing to have a podcast that talks about Flyers hockey, but also doesn't insult you if you have a different opinion on how the team should be assembled or why you like a player, good or bad. That's why I left Broad Street Hockey and their sanctimonious group of writers and fans. You guys have a lot of fun telling it like it is and a passion for the Flyers. It's enjoyable to watch and listen. Plus, having Bundy on is great. Nice to have players' eye on things, and his passion for the team is undeniable. Keep up the good work in this horrendous time of our Flyers fandom. You know what? I would say, Bundy, I think we kept it pretty positive today. I do. 7, what were you? 7? You were 7-11 and 2, right?
No, we really do. We don't want to come on and call this thing a dumpster fire. But if you're going to sit here and you're going to present a dumpster fire to us, we're going to point it out. We're going to keep pointing it out. I want to come on. I hope, and I mean this. I want to come on at Thanksgiving and be 11-7-1. I want to have something good to talk about, or 11-7-2, whatever the number was we had. But, again, it has not been a lot. People are like, you guys are, or some people say you guys are negative. No, we're not. The negativity's already been spelt out all over the wall for us. We're just kind of shining a light on it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Do your job well, do your job accordingly. No athlete in this town gets a free pass. When I played like shit, I got booed. When the team doesn't show up and the whole team plays like crap, 6,000 people show up in the building now.
And he got a C grade from me in the Daily Flyers.
Yeah,
my goal is to say go Flyers at the end of every show from here on.
It is always
go Flyers.
Listen, I always say this. When people, and it's always on Twitter, but when people say that we're too negative about the team, my counter has been for months now. Tell me something good the Flyers have done. Give me a bit of good news. And that also comes from people within the organization who will text us and say why is it so negative? I always say, give me something good. Give me something good. And there have been times where the Flyers have worked with youth groups in the area and they've worked on expanding the game and they've worked with Snyder Hockey. And I think it's all great. And I am happy to tout that stuff because I think that's great for growing the game. I think it's great outreach for youth in the area who want to learn to play hockey and want something exciting to do. You're growing the game. I will happily talk about that. 100%. Each and every day. I don't like scour all of the things on the Flyers site to proactively look for those things they're doing, but anybody who wants to shoot them over my way will happily talk about it on the show. The team itself, not well built, could be well coached. Maybe these guys surprise us. We don't know. We're quite a bit out. Hey, Kadri's still out there. Probably going to go to the Islanders. Maybe I can't. I was going to say maybe Chuck trades JVR, moves a couple of other deals, and Kadri comes here on like an overinflated contract, as has kind of been a trend in recent years here. But I don't think that'll happen. So the Flyers are still, by the way, $2.5 million over the cap. That's going to be fun. Great. So maybe that was a little bit negative. Thanks for listening this week. We'll be back hopefully next week. I think that's going to be the plan, is to come back to weekly. And if we're not, feel free to tweet at us at SnowTheGoalie. Send us an email, snowthegoalie@gmail.com. You can message us on Facebook or Instagram. On Instagram, we're at SnowTheGoalie. On Facebook, facebook.com/SnowTheGoalie. You can watch the full episode over on the Crossing Broad YouTube channel, which is now youtube.com. If you do /Crossing Broad, that'll work, or Crossing Broad Sports, I believe is the other one. You'll find the whole playlist. All of those links are in the description of the episode on any podcast platform you listen to. Remember, you can talk to any smart device, whether it's an Apple device talking to Siri, if it's an Android device talking to Google, an Amazon device talking to Alexa, or some other random like knockoff you found on Amazon that has a smart assistant. You can ask them to play the latest episode of Snow the Goalie Flyers podcast. Boom, right there for you. So follow these guys on Twitter. Their links are also in the description. You find Ant on Twitter at AntSanFilly, Bundy at CTarian6. I'm on Twitter at JoyOnBroad. We'll be back next week to talk about maybe some new developments in Flyers land. And if not, maybe we'll be talking about the Phillies again. I don't know. We'll see. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.
What's that? We're going to talk next week.